I stepped on that patch of ice under the snow and went, shing, and bam, down on my back. And I hit my head, but not hard enough to knock myself out. But I kind of knocked myself, I call it an out of Hendricks experience, because for about 2 minutes, I wasn't out, I was in. And it was like I was seeing myself all the way down to the very essence of myself.
What if the wisdom we're searching for isn't somewhere out there, but already within us? And what if we don't need to access that by bonking ourselves on the head? Today, I'm having a delightful conversation with Gay Hendricks about Elvis, Ram Dass, and also about consciousness, creativity, and why the biggest limits in our lives are often the ones we place on ourselves. Welcome to the Miles to Zen podcast, conversations shaped by curiosity, creativity, and connection. I'm your host, Shannon Miles Halliday, and this show is where we explore new possibilities and embrace the wild, beautiful, ever-unfolding adventure of being human. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Miles to Zen podcast. I'm so thrilled that we have Gay Hendricks with us today. And Gay has been a leader in his field for over 50 years. He's published numerous books along with his wife and co-creator, Dr. Kathleen Hendricks. And he's published one of my absolute favorite books, which is The Big Leap. And that's how I discovered his work. This is one of his earlier books, The 5 Wishes. And I've listened to multiple books of his on audiobooks, The Genius Zone, Conscious Living. And this book, Loving Life, I must say, is my favorite. And Dr. Hendricks, Gay Hendricks, received his doctorate from Stanford in 1974. He was a professor of psychology at the University of Colorado, and him and his wife, Kathleen, created the Hendricks Institute. And I'll put all the details in the show notes. So welcome so much. I'm so thrilled to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much. Glad to be with you.
You know what's funny is I found your work a number of years ago. I was a VP in a corporate job, and I discovered The Big Leap. And we had an interesting dynamic in that the CEO was very Jim Collins, and here I was on the other side, very Gay Hendricks. And I just loved, he would always insist on inserting Jim Collins in all of our town halls, but I ran our town halls. And so I would insist on putting your work in there. And anyways, it was a great dynamic. And I asked AI to compare the two of you, and it said that the most sophisticated leaders use both. And you're used to remove upper limit problems, step into your zone of genius, and expand your identity. And he's used to hire correctly, get clarity and strategy. Hendricks unlocks the internal governor, and Collins builds the external engine. And I'm of the belief that if you don't get that internal stuff sorted, doesn't matter how many external engines you got, it doesn't matter. And so that's how I was introduced to you and where I'm coming from. And I've been looking to get rid of my upper limiting problems ever since, and have enjoyed your work so much. And thank you so much for all that you and your wife have contributed to the world.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And I was having a good chuckle when you were mentioning Jim Collins, because there was about, from about 1986 to around late 90s, when I kind of semi-retired from doing corporate consulting. Got tired of the traveling, to be honest with you. I used to, I did what I call parachute therapy, where I would parachute into the boardroom where three board members weren't speaking to each other. And my job was to bust up the log jam and get some kind of positive outcome. So I always felt like a parachute guy going into often alien territory because the parachutist wasn't always appreciated. You know, there were sometimes two of the board members that wanted to do some kind of communication thing, which they brought me in for. And then it'd be three who didn't want to do it. So I'd be wrestling. But anyway, to make a long story short, I spent a lot of time being compared to June Collins
Okay.
because of the problem that you're talking about is no matter if you are really good at execution and getting the T's dotted and all of that kind of thing, you've got to deal with the human element. And humans come with this problem called the upper limit problem. And we're always bumping up against, in the process of our growth, the very barriers that we need to transcend on the inner level in order to execute efficiently on the outer level. So I feel like I was the guy oftentimes that was called in to pick up the pieces when the other stuff hadn't worked, because we were often in a situation where there was a lot of chaos when we would come in, and we always said every time a PhD entered the room, the collective IQ dropped by a point. And so if you had 20 or 30 PhDs in the same room, or engineers or whatever, you'd be functioning at all of them were 120 IQs. By the time you got into the room, you're dealing with subnormal people trying to solve a very complex problem. And so that's why it's so important to get alignment with your emotions and get alignment with how your body works and those kinds of things that are um, so easily overlooked, because from the time we're walking around, we're being bombarded with messages about the external.
Yeah.
You've got to wear the right jeans and you got to have the right this and the right that. And it's always coming from outside. Nobody ever tuned into me when I was in the seventh grade and said, "Do you actually enjoy wearing jeans?" Because it was Florida, Central Florida, where it's the humidest place on earth. I didn't ever like jeans when I was growing up, but that's what everybody wore. So
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that funny? My son may kill me for this, but I don't think he will listen. But he has just started wearing jeans again, and he's 15. But he was only going to wear sweatpants from, I mean, I had him in jeans when he was little because they were so darn cute. But now it feels that cute has started to matter again. So he's back in the jeans.
well, I totally have nothing against jeans except trying to wear them on a 95-degree, 98 humidity day in Central Florida, where not even the alligators are out. They're trying to hide underwater, and boy, jeans, I don't know, there's something about them. They seem to collect moisture or something.
Right? They're also terrible for skiing. I'm in Vancouver, Canada, and back when I was like a kid, there was a lot of people that just wore jeans skiing. I never understood it. It was a really bad choice.
I hate that because you get wet and then your legs freeze.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, this is great because I really wanted our discussion to feel like a coffee chat. And I want people to just feel like they're in a cafe with us and just joining us for this chat. And so I've got a few things that I want to talk to you about, but I also want to have our conversation just flow because when I first started my podcast, you were one of my first thoughts for guests because I just found your work so helpful. But I wasn't going to invite you until I had a whole year under my belt. And so here we are. I don't think I'm done after this podcast, but I was like, yes, crossed I've crossed out of my excellence zone. Look at that.
Well, thank you. I'm glad I'm a symptom of your genius zone.
Yeah,
And
yes, there you go.
congratulations, by the way. Most people don't do anything for a year. Uh, Stay on a diet, whatever. But congratulations for showing up
Oh,
successfully for a year. That's good stuff.
well, thank you so much. In reviewing a lot of your work, I've realized actually You know, the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know.
Boy, do I know that.
And so in reviewing a lot of your work, I was like, oh my goodness, I've got some work to do. And in fact, I expect my upper limiting problem to try to get through my door any minute, or one of my upper limiting problems. And that's my little black cat named Soda.
I have a cat. I understand.
Yes. And maybe if we can start, I wanted to get into a few of the stories from this book because I just loved it so much. And it was such a quick read, but it was because it was so compelling. It was one of those books I just didn't want to put down because I love stories and I love sharing people's stories. I love writing stories. And it turns out you also like writing stories, which I had no idea until I read this book that you've written 9 mystery novels.
More than that, I've got a couple in the pipeline.
Oh, amazing. I love that.
And I didn't start till I was 65 writing fiction.
Right. And wasn't it some astrologer that told you that you were going to be hyper creative after 65?
Yeah, I met him. This was a guy named Ed Steinbrecher. He's now passed on, but he was quite a famous astrologer, and I just happened to be at a party with him. Um, so he asked me what my sign was, what my birthday was, and I'm an astrological ignoramus, so I had nothing. I didn't pay any attention to that. I knew I was an Aquarius, they told me, but that was about all I knew. So I asked him, and he asked me what my birthday was, and he did a couple of cogitations on it. And he said, "Oh, you're really lucky." Because I was about maybe 35 or 37 at the time, 35 probably. And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Oh, you're going to have a really good," he said, "you're always going to be successful, but you're going to have a really good run of creative success later in your life." And I said, how late in my life? And he said, "Oh, 77, 78, 65." He named off a few like high numbers for a 35-year-old. I thought, oh my gosh, that's wow. But anyway, when I was 65 years old, one day I'm sitting out in the backyard and just kind of being with whatever. And suddenly an idea came to me that I wanted to turn on the creative spigots in myself, not just the ones that write self-help books. That takes a certain kind of thinking, but to talk about things that had never happened, to make up stories, because in my life, all the stories that I tell are stories that actually happened to me or real people that I've worked with. But wouldn't it be fun to take a character and make up a story about him? So that was my first thought. So in the middle of the night, I woke up and I was reading a mystery novel, and it was on the side of the bed. And I was thinking, well, maybe I'll read my mystery novel, but I don't want to turn on the light, and Katie's asleep. And so the idea came to me, I'll write my own.
Oh, I love it.
And so I said, who would be the most fascinating character I could write stories about? And immediately I got a picture of a vaguely Asian-looking man standing on the bluffs at the Pacific Palisades, looking back toward Asia across the Pacific Ocean. So he's in LA, looking back toward and I asked him, "What are you doing there?" And he said, "I'm trying to figure out whether I'm an American now or I'm still an Asian." "Oh, why is that an issue for you?" And then he started telling me his story. And that's how I got Tenzing Norbu on the line. And so for the next half a dozen books, I would just sit at my typewriter and he would tell me his story.
I
And
love it.
yeah, isn't that amazing?
Well, it is amazing. And you know what? Going way back into one of your stories of meeting Ramdas.
Yes.
Now, why don't you describe this meeting of Ramdas and how was such a good speaker. Because
Oh,
I feel that there's the same thing is happening to you with Tenzing's story there.
oh, I never put those two things together. Thank you. That's a cool insight. Thank you. Um, well, Ram Dass, everybody knows him now, and he's now dead, but yeah, he was very colorful figure in his lifetime. I happened to meet him just after he had come back from India for the first time. Time travel now back to the late 1960s, 1969. I'm 24 years old. I'm a teacher in a school for delinquent boys in New Hampshire. And these are kids from the streets of Boston, so anyway, I'd had a 2-year immersion in how to work with really difficult kids. Anyway, my buddy Neil called me one afternoon and said, "Hey, I'm going over to see my old favorite college professor at Harvard. And he's just come back from India and he's doing something really unusual. And I want to see what it is. And it's only 30 miles from your house. You want to go with me?" And I said, "What are we talking about here?" And he said, "Well, I don't really know, but let's take a chance." And so we go in, I get in the car and we drive 30 miles and we go in this beautiful estate in Webster Lake, New Hampshire. And oh, just gorgeous grounds and this beautiful mansion. It turned out it was Ram Dass, formerly named Richard Alpert, who came from a very powerful Jewish family in the Boston area, philanthropists and made a lot of money and that kind of thing. So he was the scion of that family. And that was his father's estate. There was Ram Dass in full robes, white robes, necklaces, and he had about a dozen of these young people in yoga pants and Indian saris and that kind of thing. And see, I was an English major in college. I took one psychology course and maybe made a C in it. And so I didn't have any context for what these people were doing, that they were a group of spiritual seekers. That just didn't compute in my mind. It looked crazy to me. But then Ram Dass started talking. And he was talking about the most amazing subjects about life. And, it was like no teacher I'd ever heard of. He was talking about the very essence of living. And where was he getting this information from? Because he didn't have any notes. He's just sitting there, and occasionally he would pick up a picture of this grizzled elderly man I came to find was his guru. And he would look at this for a while, and he would just, and then he'd put the picture down and he'd start talking again. And so he did that for 3 hours. Even with juvenile delinquents, I would enter a class with 3 pages of careful notes, lesson plans, and all of that kind of thing. And here was Ram Dass somehow getting this stuff out of the ethers. And so as soon as he finished talking, I rushed over there and I said, "What you were talking about was fascinating, but where did you get this from? I didn't see any notes or anything. Where'd you find this stuff?" And he said, "Oh, it's just there. You just have to kind of open up to it." What? I mean, that
Well, you're like,
sounded, my brain cells were exploding. This was not what my rational mind knew how to process. The idea that there was this living wisdom that you could tune into, and then it became very obvious to you. Now, of course, I understand that and can feel it, and that's where I come from. But at the time of hearing that, I was a overweight, Marlboro smoking teacher at a school for rough kids. Okay, that's where I was coming from. A lot of survival. I was making $100 a week for that too, by the way, in 1969. And well, actually 110. I got a $10 raise my second year. So I was making $110 a week. And I say earning every cent of it with riding herd on 100 juvenile delinquents.
sounds like it.
Yeah. But anyway, I changed my life in that moment by asking Ram Dass. I said, "Look at me. What would you do if you were me?" and you wanted to move your life really quickly. And he looked at me and he said, well, over here, you might do some therapy, which is a good thing. If you were in India, you'd probably go to a retreat where you did yoga postures and learned to breathe and did work with your breathing and did meditation to kind of find the real you under the masks and all that. And he's just laying all this stuff out. And I'm going, ding, 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 ding. And at the end of it, he gave me this little 2-minute rap on, and I said, well, thank you, but where would I learn about stuff like that? I said, I'm an English major. I read poetry in my spare time. Where would I find it? And he said, he made this cool little dismissive, I can see it to this day, this dismissive little thing with his hand where he went, oh, something will come to you. Kind of flick. And then he turned to the next person. It was clear my time was up. Anyway, I went to the grocery store. And in checking out, I looked to my left and there was a kiosk of paperback books. And one of them almost seemed to jump off the thing at me. It was called Yoga, Youth, and Reincarnation by Jess Stern. And I looked it up one time on Amazon. You can still buy it out there. But anyway, what it is one chapter after another, a chapter on breathing with all these, different techniques, a chapter on meditation. Here's exactly how to meditate. A chapter on yoga postures and a chapter on chanting. It was just laid out and one exercise after another. So I bought this book and I can actually remember it was 95 cents.
Wow.
I don't know how much paperbacks cost today, but they're not 95 cents anymore. But anyway,
and you're only making 110 a week.
Yeah, that was a major investment. So I plopped down my 95 cents and I got this book. And my partner at the time was away in Maine for the weekend. And so I didn't have anything to do. And I started doing this book about 3:00 in the afternoon, just one exercise after another, with some meal breaks and that kind of thing. So I get to about midnight. I got to the meditation chapter and I did this meditation and it was like everything dropped away. All my thoughts just kind of quieted in the background. And there I was sitting in the state of pure consciousness with 2 minutes of meditation. It had been there all along. I just didn't know where to find it. Like that wisdom that Ramdas was talking about. It's there all along. We just have to kind of expand to a certain level and then it comes in. Wow. Well, that's my Ramdas story. Oh, later on, I should say that I met him many times throughout my life because we would be speaking at the same place. And actually, get this, he was in the room the night I first saw my wife, Kathleen, which 46 years ago. So Ramdas happened to be in this same room with us and about 50 other people too. So that's how many years later after 1969? That's 1980. So 11 years later, he pops into my life again on the night I met my beloved partner of 46 years. I mean, how bizarre is that?
Yeah.
And then occasionally I would bump into him when we would be speaking at the same conference or something like that. So we were never really close friends or anything, but I owe him a lot of gratitude for the things he did.
Well, yeah, it would be tempting to have asked him. I don't know if you did. Did he remember you? Because you obviously went through quite a transformation.
He probably did. I never thought about that. But yeah, by the time, I remember him saying one time, he said, he was talking about a speech he had given. And he said, they wanted me to talk about the 60s, but I can't even remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. Because then he was 70 years old.
Oh, that's neat. And one thing I remember you talking about that when you discovered that you could access this consciousness and you didn't have to bump your head. And
Yes.
so you had actually accessed this way longer before.
Oh, not long before.
Oh, it wasn't long before? When did you bump your head? What's that story?
That all happened very quickly together. I can't remember exactly, but I slipped on the ice in January of 1969.
Oh, okay.
And I met Ram Dass later. I mean, it wasn't much later, but I remember the snow was off the ground. So it was a couple of months, maybe. A few months. Yeah.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us what happened to you when you hit the ground?
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, picture that I was very obese. Now I'm about 6 feet tall and I weigh about 190 pounds. So I look like an athletic kind of person. Um, but then I was definitely pear-shaped. And I hadn't done anything. I didn't do any exercise and my diet was awful. I smoked heavily, Marlboros. Um, and I was in a terrible relationship, but neither one of us had enough money to move out. That's how poor we were. And I was teaching at this school, and $110 a month barely fed me, much less another person. And anyway, so it was a tough time. And I went out, I felt trapped basically. And I went out for a walk after a big argument. And I wasn't paying attention. It had just snowed the day before, and there was snow still on the uh, road, out on a country road, and there was a patch of ice under the snow. And so as I was trudging along, kind of caught up in what am I going to do, I stepped on that patch of ice under the snow and went, shing, and bam, down on my back. And I hit my head, but not hard enough to knock myself out. But I kind of knocked myself, I call it an out of Hendricks experience, because for about 2 minutes, I wasn't out, I was in. And it was like I was seeing myself all the way down to the very essence of myself. I could see my muscles were awfully tight, tighter than they needed to be. And I could see all my feelings that I'd never really paid attention to. I felt like I'm still angry about my father dying, and I'm still sad about my grandmother dying. And, all of these things that I'd kind of pushed down underneath smoking and being in a terrible relationship and all that. And so I had all of these feelings, but then as I kind of bead with them and kind of felt them, I became aware of this other thing that I call pure consciousness, which is this shimmering light backdrop of everything that just is. It's not there one day and gone the next, it's there. And our job is to let ourselves feel that fully in addition to everything else, instead of trying to hide our light or hide our feelings or tense our muscles to keep from feelings. To this, let ourselves be transparent and live in that state of pure consciousness. So this all happened in about 2 minutes. And then I started coming back into my normal self. Oh, I'm lying on my back on a frozen road. Oh, I want a cigarette. Oh, I got to walk back home. Oh, and I could feel all of these levels of my own entrapment kind of closing in on me again. But I did this one thing that probably saved my life. I said to nobody, to the universe, to everybody, I said, I'm going to do whatever it takes to feel that pure consciousness in every moment of my life. That's my path. And wow, that changed everything. Within a month, I'd lost 35 pounds by eating food I'd never eaten before. I put myself on this radical diet. I figured everything I ate before made me fat. I'll just eat stuff that I've never eaten before. And I discovered this whole category of foods that I call vegetables. And and then this other category that I would call fruit. And I never ate those things before, but suddenly I realized, well, if I'm eating something I never really ate before, let me try eating some broccoli, which I found to be absolutely delicious if I cooked it properly. And same thing with, I never ate bananas, I ate some bananas or blueberries. That was my thing because they were easy to get in New England.
Yeah.
And so I ate blueberries. Whoa, boy, did I live on blueberries. And so anyway, I hit my first upper limit problem though, because after a month, I'd lost 35 pounds and I'm down in Cambridge, Mass, and I'm walking toward the Harvard bookstore to buy some books for this school that I'm a teacher at. And I look to my left, and there's this family of four devouring this giant banana split with 3 different flavors of ice cream. And I'd been
It's
on
cruel, just cruel to run into that.
yeah. And I looked at it and I said, or my old self said, I got to have that. And I went in and I ordered a whole one for myself. I can't believe it now. I mean, even if I had one bite, it would probably make me go, oh, now, because I haven't had, much sugar in the past 15 or 20 years. But at that time, I was so addicted to it, I just wolfed that thing down. And for the next 20 minutes, I was the king of the universe, while all that sugar was pumping through me.
Yeah.
But what happened after that was really a life changer because I was walking down the street and all of a sudden it felt like a boxer had punched me right in the stomach. I got this sudden stomach ache that made me bend over in the street and kind of put my head between my legs. And I remember a lady saying, "Are you okay, sir? Are you okay?" Well, big question because I wasn't. And I was in the middle of my first upper limit problem. I sabotaged my growth and I went back and I'd gained 5 pounds back of the 35 pounds I'd lost in one day.
Wow.
Whoa. And so that made a big impression on me. So I went back, it's like your podcast about Zen, Miles to Zen. I've spent time in Zen monasteries and, the teacher just kept saying, back to one,
Right.
back to the breath, no matter what happens, back to one. You'd count up to 10 and then go back to one. It took me about 10 days to even make it to 7 before I could count to 10. I guess it's true for everybody, but our biggest enemy is our various strength in a way, because it's not an enemy. It has to be contended with. Like my intellect, for example, that's where I lived for 20 some years.
Yeah.
And suddenly now to realize in my 20s that I was more than my mind, that I was my body, I was my feelings. I was more than that. I was my consciousness itself. And those kinds of awarenesses, I wish we could all get to them by having violins playing and while we were
Right.
eating ambrosia, but that's not the way it
That'd be
happens.
much better.
A lot of them have to be bottom out situations. And I think that's what I required.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting how our various things, our various vices block that access?
Oh, yeah. Boy, I'll tell you, I quit smoking in 3 days, but it took me years to kick sugar. I mean, I got 90% down, I think, back in the 90s, but then that last, and I could still feel the effects of it were not good in my body.
Yeah.
Now I can have a little bit. I call it homeopathic amounts of sugar. But if I sat down and tried to eat a whole bowl of ice cream, that would throw me off for days.
Right.
That used to be what I would call a snack back in my 20s,
Right.
ice cream. And so it's possible to feel as crazy about an organic apple as I once did about a Big Mac.
That's pretty cool. That's a definite move into your genius zone.
Definitely, yeah. I got started on that back in the 80s and just kept my focus on getting more and more time in my genius zone. And so by about 1999, that's what I was doing all day. And the last 25 years of just basically fine tuning that. So
And does anything kick you out of your genius zone anymore?
I can't think of anything. I think I had a situation back in 2013 where I got involved in a business situation with several other New Age luminaries. And one of them turned out to be a bit of a stinker. And I didn't want to be in business with that person anymore. And so it took me a little tap dance to extricate myself, but I did successfully. And everything worked out great for me anyway. I don't know how it worked out for them because I didn't want to have any more business with them. But so that was what, 13 years ago. I would say that was a dip into my
Yeah.
excellence zone because it was
Yeah.
one of those moments say, oh yeah, I could do a little bit of stuff and make a lot of money doing it.
Yeah.
What a bad motivation. No wonder I got booted in the bottom.
Right? That's such a good lesson for all of us. And one of the things I wrote down from your book, and I wrote it down, well, not only because it's good, but because I've heard various versions of it. One of my favorite acupuncturists here in Vancouver, he calls it NAC. I think Byron Katie went through a similar thing, and you call it fact. And it sounds like you did exactly that when you'd been sort of kicked out of your genius zone, then you did that fact.
Yes, FACT.
Yeah.
You got to face something. That's the F.
Yeah.
You've got to accept it. You've got to choose a new path, commitment, but then you got to take action, and that sticks up a lot of people. Do you know how many people I've met in my life? I started writing books. My first one came out in 1975. So that's what, 51 years. And I just had a new one come out, which you were kind enough to hold up. But in that time, I've written 61 books. Okay. And I've got a couple more in the pipeline. Guess how many people, because I kept careful count of this for a while, just because it was a phenomenon that kept happening. Guess how many people, when they would have conversations with me, would say, I'm going to write a book. Here's what my book is about. I've had this book inside me. But you know what? Of those 160 some conversations over the past 50 years, I've actually seen 2 or 3 people follow through on that. And actually later on, I saw their book or they sent me a copy of their book. That's not a very good percentage though, because so there's this vast number of books out there, and I'm not just talking about books, but here's the sad truth of it. By my rough count, of the people I've interacted with, even lots of famous ones, there's only about 3 or 4% of them that will actually do what they say they're going to do. They keep their agreements.
Yeah.
They're in touch with their feelings. And they're basically positive in the sense that they do things that make their life better for themselves and other people. Those are 3 things that a lot of people are not very good at. And life will teach us brutally and sometimes until we figure that stuff out.
Yeah.
But still, if you go into any prison, like there was a big study of the California prison system some years ago for 20,000 prisoners, and they simply asked them, why are you here in prison? And they would all write their answer out. And so all the computer stuff later turned out the number one person they blamed for being there, I wouldn't be here except for my lawyer. The second biggest group were family, but way big for spouse or partner. I wouldn't be here, but my crazy wife ratted me out. Right. And the third batch of people that were blamed for being there were kids. I wouldn't be here except my kids ratted me out. So in other words, if you don't take responsibility for what's going on in your life, life will keep putting you in smaller and smaller boxes until the last one is some little cell that you're in because most people don't take responsibility. Like I have worked in prisons before, and one of the first things you learn, there's nobody guilty in here.
Yeah.
Everybody is quick to tell you a story of why they don't belong there. I don't think I ever had a conversation except with the groups I was running where I would make them do this, but just say, I'm here because I stuck up a liquor store. You wouldn't believe the look of liberation that can come off a hardened criminal's face when they acknowledge something like that. Or, oh, my being here hurts, dot, dot, dot. Just to acknowledge the reality of that. Other people are suffering. I'm in here. To get those kinds of awarenesses, even if you're in therapy for a long time, sometimes you can delay that awareness for a long time.
Well, it's hard to speak truth to yourself.
Yeah.
You don't want to see it. And yeah, I feel that on the sugar front. Sugar and I are not telling the truth to each other more often than I would like. But yes, it is hard to face that truth.
Yeah,
And
well,
it
you know
brings,
why? Because what do you from the very beginning, our brains up here are translating into, is this glucose something I can run on, or is this not glucose, something I don't need? And it's been sitting up there for 50 million years,
yeah,
making
yeah.
that distinction. And so, uh, if you look at the very cellular level of things, you can see that there's this one thing that comes in from this side of the cell that's acid, and this other thing that balances out that alkaline that comes in from the other side of the cell. And there's this delicate balance going all of the time. So, yeah, God bless if anybody kicks that long an addiction, because also if they're keeping somebody alive in the hospital, what have you got plugged into their arm? Not protein powder, it's glucose. That's what the fundamental is. So it's very hard to kick manufactured sugar in this life, but blessings upon you if you can do it though, because your life is awaiting you. I know people all the time that have gone from a whole lot of sugar to very little sugar, and overnight, their bodies quit waking up with joint pain and they start sleeping better. And I'm sounding like a madman now, but I might as well.
Well,
I'm 81 years old. I don't have to put a lot of attention into caring what other people think. Yeah.
well, that's where you want to get to, right? Like I feel this is what happens to women in menopause. All of a sudden, you just don't care as much about what other people are thinking.
Yeah. And the positive side of that too is that's why I only hire in my office. I have one grandmother that kind of runs the whole show. And then other grandmothers or people in that age range, that do other things. And, I have young personal assistants and things like that. But there's nothing better than life experience. And women in their 50s, particularly, where a lot of my folks that work with me are in their 50s, they have this thing called vocational arousal too. They really like doing what they're doing. They want to be doing some stuff like the woman that runs my office. She's raised 5 kids and she has a bunch of grandkids. And now she wants to be doing something else when she's 55 years old. She wants to be engaged with her job and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, Barbara Marks Hubbard, an old friend of ours that has been in our lives for most of our lives. She passed away a few years ago. She wrote a book called The Hunger of Eve, which she talks about women getting vocationally aroused at midlife, finding something that they really want to put their attention in that's not based on home or kids or anything like that.
Yeah.
And, most of them still have that kind of stuff going, but also build in this other thing of getting a passion in your
Yeah.
50s and 60s.
Absolutely. I think I spent the first, well, I worked in clean tech. I was really working on solving climate change for many decades of my career. And because I felt it was something that I should do, if I knew what was going on in the world, I should do this. And my perspective was really that of saving the planet. And it's since shifted to help make the planet healthier. But yeah, as Jane Goodall realized, and I think many of us do, if we're not healthier, if we're not taking care of what we get really excited about and can get enchanted, as Liz Gilbert says, or passionate about, then we're really denying the world so much. And what good can come out of that, I think, is incredible. And so I've done a quick 180 in my career.
Well,
And
congratulations. Congratulations for aiming yourself in the direction of your genius zone.
yeah, yeah. And I think, parents identify this in us early. Well, the parents who are paying attention identify this in their kids early on. Um, and it just often takes a while for us to see it in ourselves. And other people could see it in ourselves often more easily. I want to talk to you about two things. One is Elvis Presley, and the other is art. But I think it ties in actually, because I saw a post you did recently on Andrea Bocelli. But let's talk about Elvis first and your ability to manifest. And I
Yes.
love that because I think it ties into consciousness. And I know that's quite a while ago, but I also think that you probably manifested, Katie, when
Oh,
you were, when you're working in your zone of genius.
yes.
The things
She's the
appear.
main symptom of my genius.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
I did manifest her. And well, you mentioned Elvis. That was one of the great moments in my life. I first heard the name Elvis Presley, and I was on a schoolyard, and I remember this other kid, we were near the slide, and I heard these kids talking about Elvis Presley. And this would have been 1955 or 56, okay, when I was in the sixth grade. And I just thought the name, that is an unusual name. And then I asked them who Elvis Presley said, and they said, "Oh, you hear him on the radio sometimes." Oh, he's a singer. And then he started popping up on the radio, and I bought the first Elvis Presley album in Leesburg, Florida. Okay, there was one little music shop, and they were the first to get Elvis Presley, and I had that thing in my hands the day it came out. So I wore out practically I just loved Elvis. And so my mother was a journalist, and I talked her into getting an interview with Elvis Presley because he was coming to the Orlando Municipal Auditorium, which was 40 miles away. It was the big town in Central Florida. And he was coming there. That was when I was in the seventh grade. And so, bless her heart, my mother did it, even though she hated that kind of music. Just couldn't stand it. But she was
Devil's
also a really
music.
good reporter too, and she wanted to find out about the phenomenon, and write a story about meeting Elvis Presley. There was about 30 other journalists that were given press passes, and they all got two to bring a plus one, a person that wasn't a journalist. And so I got the plus one. So we got there hours before the before the concert started. And I got tired of sitting around, and my mother got kind of herded into this journalist bullpen area, and I couldn't go in there. So I got just tired of sitting around waiting in the auditorium, and I went out to a little park. It was across the street behind some trees, and it was just a regular old city park, but there were benches in it. And I sat down there and I started doing my homework. That was the deal with my mother, that I would do my homework while she was in this meeting. And so there wasn't anything else happening. And I finished doing my homework and I was just sitting around. And then all of a sudden I saw a line of about half a dozen white Cadillacs coming up the street. And who could it be but Elvis Presley, right? Because I knew that he had an entourage of Cadillacs. And so I had never seen hardly any Cadillacs in my life before, because I came to this little hick town 40 miles outside of Orlando called Leesburg. And so I was standing up by the curb just waiting for this entourage to pass by, and it pulled up and stopped right beside me. And the window went down, and Elvis Presley leaned his head out the window. He was in the passenger side and said, "Hey, boy, you know where the Orlando Municipal Auditorium is?" It wasn't visible, see, from where they were, because it was around the other side of these trees. And I was so tongue-tied, I couldn't speak. I just got vapor lock in my throat, and I just my jaw. All I could do was go, "Ah, and gesture to go around the trees. And Elvis immediately knew what the problem was, and he said, thank you very much." And the window goes up. Electric windows, by the way, that's another phenomenon that I hadn't seen much of in my life. And so anyway, there went the entourage around the trees and into the parking lot. And that's how I got to see Elvis Presley. My mother still didn't like him after the interview. She kind of wrote a sort of a sarcastic story about him. She was an incredible writer. She was an amazing writer. And she had a column in the paper every day. And I think she devoted one of her columns to how Elvis Presley was soon going to die a natural death. Nobody was going to listen to that kind of music anymore. And one of many things that my mother was wrong about. I can say that now, 35 years after her passing.
Yeah, I think she got that one wrong. Have you always had an interest in music and art and performance? Reading your books and listening to your books, it feels like you're so touched by different things. And the stories that stood out for me were the Elvis story, of course, but then listening to Andrea Bocelli just recently at the opening ceremonies to the Olympics, and then some paintings that you go to visit regularly. And I've done a lot of art. I love the creative stuff. Um, and it speaks so deeply to me. And has that always been there? Or as you opened up your consciousness, it settled in?
I think a little bit of both, because in the early days, my mother said that I was always, as soon as I could read long before I went to school. I taught myself to read by my mother would read the newspaper in the morning, and I would study the words carefully and try to make sense of them. And I wasn't going to tell anybody until I could actually read a sentence. That was my thing with myself. And so I didn't even tell my brother. It was my mother, my brother, and I. That was our family. And so I finally, they were having the Korean War. And I finally figured out, oh, WAR, that spells war. And that was my first word. And I remember saying, now, wait a minute, does it spell raw? And I remember trying to figure that out. But anyway, I was always writing little stories down, my mother said. I would write little scraps of paper, And so from 5 years on, I wrote constantly and kept notebooks and would write stories. I uh, I think I decided I wanted to be a writer, partly from not watching how she did it. My mother was Camel cigarette in the side of her mouth, cup of coffee, and bam, 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 bam on an old Underwood typewriter. That was the
With
soundtrack.
some rollers as well?
No, no, that was way too fashion conscious for my mother. It was usually jam on some kind of a hat and put her dark glasses on. But she smoked constantly, unfiltered cigarettes, and also drank coffee all day long. And so seeing my mother with this filter of haze around her all of the time, that was how I kind of remember my early childhood. Um, but I think I wanted to be a writer. That seemed like she seemed to me, even though she didn't seem personally happy, she seemed really happier when she was doing it than when she wasn't doing it. And anything that has that effect on people, that caught my eye, you know? And
Yeah.
same thing with, I don't know if you can see it, but I have a autographed picture of Albert Einstein back behind me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's one of my prized treasures. Katie gave it to me one year for our anniversary. He made such a big impression on me when I was a kid because I went to the lumber yard with my granddad to buy a 2x4 for some project my granddad had. And there was a picture of Albert Einstein on the wall. And I don't know why it was there in Leesburg, Florida, on a lumber yard. But Albert Einstein, I came to find, was quite famous at the time because, you know, he was this great thinker and all of that, the theory of relativity. I didn't know that at the time. I said to my granddad, "Who is that old man? Is he the owner?" And my granddad said, "No, that's Albert Einstein." And I said, "Who is he? What does he do?" That was when I asked him, "What does he do?" And my granddad said, he's a thinker. And I said, "You mean you can get paid for thinking?" And see, Leesburg, Florida was about oranges. It was about fishing. It was about watermelons. And it was all, I learned to drive by driving up and down the Jeep, up and down the rows of my family's orange groves. I mean, I learned to drive much before I got my driver's license, just because I needed to get the oranges hauled up and
I
down.
drove the baling truck as soon as I could put my feet on the pedals and see over the dash.
I thought it was cool at the time, you know. They gave us driver education when I was 14 years old. By then, I could have operated a 18-wheeler probably. You know, I had a
Right.
lot of practice. I started driving when I was 12. Um, anyway, I don't know how we got on that subject, but Albert Einstein got me on thinking, wow, you don't have to grow watermelons. I could do something else except worry about oranges. Oranges were a big subject in my family, how the orange crop was doing, and had nematodes invaded the oranges, and are we going to have a hard freeze this year? Those kind of things were, you know, I just didn't want to spend my time thinking about fruit. And I think I turned my back on it. I could have eaten every sort of fruit from my own backyard, I think, growing up, grapefruit and tangelos and everything, oranges for sure. But I think I turned my back on all of that. Now I'm proud to say at 81, I've started another garden. Katie and I started, we had some planters assembled out in the back, and we got them filled with soil, and we just planted our veggies this week. So we're back in the farming business now after 70 years in my case.
I saw those. I saw those posts. Farmer Gay and Farmer Katie. And
We
they
tried
were
when we lived in Colorado, but we had this beautiful garden. And one afternoon we went to the movies. And while we were in the movies, there was this horrendous hailstorm. And we came back, and our garden, beautiful garden, was mostly sticks. You know,
oh,
that was, it didn't inspire me to want to do it again.
yeah, I digress here, but I just had a raccoon take all of my kale.
Ugh, man, I have trapped so many raccoons here. I have one of those friendly have a heart traps, you
Yeah.
know, that peanut butter and marshmallows, you know,
Well,
I
those
never,
guys can be pretty mean. You're brave
oh
to
yeah.
trap a raccoon.
Yeah, I found the magic though is to smear some peanut butter on a marshmallow and toss it in my have a heart trap. I can, if raccoons are getting me, I can get them overnight usually.
Where do you take the raccoons?
Oh, out in the woods.
Okay.
I take them way the heck out. Um, I could take them to a place I could take them to, but I'm not sure I want to know what they do with them once I take
Yeah,
them.
no. My dad waged a war against the squirrels, but he would capture them and then he would drop them in a park about 5 kilometers away, kinda, and I'm sure they all came back, and not only did they come back, they brought all their friends.
I've been here for 25 years, and I think they've learned to avoid my backyard because I haven't had to trap anybody in a couple of years. So they steer around me. But we have squirrels, and who are always trying to get into the bird seed to get into the bird
Yeah.
feeders, and we also have moles, and we have gophers. And every year, Ojai, where I live in a little town, a little mountain valley. We get spiders here one season of the year. So almost everybody has the pest control people come around and do spider patrol every year. Anyway, I'm off on a tangent, but
Well,
you
it
know,
was funny because I was gonna ask you about what you're excited about. What are you looking forward to? And you're certainly excited about your garden. And I joked with my girlfriends just a little while ago. All of a sudden, our group text chat has started talking about gardening. And we realized, oh my goodness, this is a sign that we're we're, in our 50s. We're talking about gardening and thrilled about it and talking about the birds. And maybe that's just a sign that we're appreciating our present a lot more than we did.
yeah, yeah. Well, I never imagined when I was growing up, like I said, in Central Florida, there was also like my aunts, both of my aunts were obsessed with flowers. They were members of the local garden club and, flowers. I remember people talking, going on about their hydrangeas and about their creeping clematis and all, these things. I just wanted to go, quit talking about that. I don't know where I got so interested in art. I know there was never any in our home or classical music either. Um, I remember hearing Wanda Landowska play Bach on a harpsichord. I just saw some little public TV show when I was like maybe 12 years old. I saw Wanda Landowska was the industry standard harpsichordist that all the other harpsichordists went to learn, but she would occasionally play. She lived in Paris, and she would play concerts of her own. And I had a record of Wanda Landowska playing Bach, and it was extraordinary. I mean, you can still get it. I still listen to it to this day. And but I loved the music of Bach. It was just so magnificently linear and easy to figure out where he was going. And then they started introducing, I mean, Mozart, I could relate to that, but then they got into other things that sounded kind of weird and Mahler and that kind of thing. I couldn't quite relate to when I was a kid. I do now, but at opera, I don't think I heard my first really good opera song, even on the radio, until I was way up in my 20s. So it just wasn't part of my life. I'll tell you though, once I heard Maria Callas, a soprano, sing a song, and I remember thinking, how does a person transmit that much emotion
Mm.
into anything? And how can that be done she's long dead, but the vibrations in her voice make me want to cry 30 years later, even though I'm listening to it not on good speakers. That fascinated me, and I want, in my writing, I want to have those effects myself. I want people to hear the music of what I'm writing, not just the words. And with Big Leap, I think I hit a peak in that genre, in the self-help genre, in the psychology of achievement, in that genre, transformational genre. That feels like a peak, along with Five Wishes, where I didn't feel like I could go much further in that
Right.
genre. And
Right.
that's why I decided to invent a genre that I knew nothing about, like writing mystery novels. And I loved reading them. I loved Sherlock Holmes when I was 12, 13 years old, still reading here, 81. And I probably read another mystery novel every week. But writing them, wow, I had to turn on a different part of my brain to do that. But I got it turned on, and I'm taking a break from writing right now. I, I have a lot of arthritis in my hands. From not only did I write 61 or 60 books, but I wrote 200 articles and
Yeah. Yeah.
blogs and everything. I don't know if you can see it, but my fingers go every which way, and my thumb joints have disappeared from hitting the space bar 5 billion
Right.
times. Uh, but I'm trying to train myself to speak, dictate a little bit more. I've never been able to do
I've
that.
just started doing that as well.
It
For
feels weird. I can't quite get used to it yet. And, you know, making a mistake. How do I go back and correct that? I can do it so easily typing, but when I try to type nowadays, sometimes I have to help my fingers get into that kind of curled position they need to have to
Right.
type. Unpleasant.
Right. Well, I would hate that to stop your stories from getting into the world. So really that the speaking thing, and there's so many good programs now. And often how I will put together a podcast if I'm doing a solo episode is I will just brain dump when I'm driving in the car to my recording, to my phone and get it recorded. And then I'll set it up in Word to record, and I'll let the whole thing play out in Word or in my podcast editing software, and then I just get it together from there. So all the hard typing has been taken care of. But I'm sure you've got lots of people that would want to work with you and help you on that front.
Well, I'm enrolling my new, we have a new AI assistant called the Coaches Portal.
Yes,
And
I heard about that.
yeah, go to hendricks.com and look for it. The Coaches Portal, it takes all of our materials, like our 900-page proprietary training manual and 200 training videos, and takes all of that and puts it in an AI silo so that you can go in and say, oh, and it uses audio too. So you could go in and say, Gay, I'm going to see a client who's feeling anxious. What are some pointers on what to know and how to deal with anxiety? And boom, 10 seconds later, you got me talking to you in your ear when you're out walking or whatever you're doing. Or you
Yeah.
could even use it for personal stuff, like I was watching the other day, somebody training to use it, and they were saying, you know, I wake up feeling tired some mornings. Even when I immediately wake up, I already feel tired. What do you think my emotions might have to do with that? Well, that's a really great question. And so we have a system now where people can do that. So I've spent a lot of the last 6 months working on that. That really excites me. So that's pretty much finished now. We just launched the voice component of that literally in the past month. And so that's been really fascinating to do. And
Well,
I'm
yeah,
supposed to work.
congratulations to you and Katie for doing that. That's pretty amazing. That is really a lot of people are so terrified of AI, and that's really jumping in both feet to use it for good.
Well, that's how I look at things. Whenever I see a whole bunch of scared people, I think market opportunity.
Well, that's a good piece of advice. Is there anything that you wanted to share that we haven't talked about yet? And I want to end with some words of wisdom from you, but besides that, if
Yes, I can think of one thing particularly that I think this time in evolution that one of our major tasks is learning to receive,
Mm,
learning how to let ourselves receive fully.
right?
And that's an art form. It's something that you do in your body as well as think about. You have to be committed to expanding in situations that might normally make you want to contract. But I think one of the evolutionary assignments of our time is to learn to embrace things rather than make them go away by contracting away from them or repelling them. And so the more we can open up to receiving, I think the better life will treat us. And so why a lot of people focus on how other people are treating them, but first focus on how you're treating yourself. Are you open fully to the good things of life? Are you open fully to accepting all of yourself? There's an acceptance factor that I think we're being called on to participate in and bring to life right now. And so, wherever you are and whatever you do, be in the question of, how can I receive more? How can I open more to letting more in? And I think that's something that I've benefited a lot from, and I'd like to see other people putting that to use.
That is great advice, especially when we think even on the basic level of a compliment. It's so difficult to just let that sit. Somebody gives you a compliment, just let it sit.
That's so important. Yeah, that's a great experiment to perform. Go around for a day complimenting people and watch how they react to it. It's often very funny. Some people, uh-oh, alert, and
Yeah.
yeah. So let's work on that proactively by making ourselves very receptive. So if a person comes up and says to me, "Hey, Gay, I like your work," make sure "Mm, thank you," instead of rushing on. You know, I
Yeah.
remember passing one time a famous politician in the airport, San Francisco airport, and I said, "Hi," and I called him by his name, and he said, "I'm late." Okay, I never want to get to be that kind of person. You know, I want to make sure if somebody comes up and tells me that something I've done changed their life, you're going to find me making eye contact and taking a couple of deep breaths, and from the bottom of whatever I can summon, thanking them for it. Because to me, life works at its best when we live in this beautiful breath of breathing in and breathing out fully. In other words, letting in fully and letting go fully. And when we're in that flow, that's what the whole universe is doing. Right now, the universe is on an in breath. Everything's expanding toward the outside. But they tell us in 5 billion years or so, it's going to flip around and head the other direction. So, but let's get aboard where the universe is doing right now, which is expansion, which is opening up to more. The stars are getting a little farther apart from each other, meaning everything's expanding. So let's go in the direction of what we say in golf, play it as it lays. If the universe is expanding, let me go along with it. Let me go along for the ride.
Well, that's beautiful. Now, I don't know if you can top that with any words of wisdom. I mean, because I just love that. I love that image. I think we could all like just rewind this by 5 minutes and use that as a miniature meditation. Any final words of wisdom you'd like to share with our Miles to Zen listeners today?
Yes, I'm just looking for something here. Hold on a second. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Around here, we sell or give away sometimes at the end of our seminars a silicone band. And what it says on it is breathe, move, love. So in other words, whenever you want to either feel better or if you're feeling stuck, stop and just breathe with that. Don't distract yourself by eating chocolate. Wait for 10 minutes later to eat your chocolate. Okay. But right now, breathe, move your body. If you're feeling stuck, the first thing to do is move your body around a little bit. Just get it unstuck and flowing. The third thing is to love as much as you can from wherever you are. Life only requires that of us, that we love as much as we possibly can from wherever we are. If you're being surrounded by people who have captured you and you are boiling in a pot of water, that may be difficult to love yourself. But love yourself for feeling uncomfortable. And in real life, you may not be able to love yourself all the time, but you can surely love yourself for not being able to love yourself.
Yeah.
So that's what life is all about, is exposing us to more and more situations that have that punchline. Oh, to accept and love that, to accept and love that, to live in that daily flow of always opening up to loving the unlovable.
And just watch what starts coming in.
Mm. Wake me up when it's over. I'm so amazing. I don't want it to end.
Well, thank you so much, Gay, for your time today. This has been just delicious. I've loved our virtual coffee date.
Yeah, good being with you. And say, Give my highest regards to Whistler Mountain when you're up there skiing next time or
I
passing by.
will. I will. Thank you for joining me on the Miles to Zen podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, I'd love for you to subscribe, follow, share, or leave a comment so we can keep growing this community together. This podcast was created and produced by Shannon Miles Halliday with original music by Anna Vovziniak.